Episode 20. Episode 20 of Leadership Untitled with Karen Turner. That's me. I Before we jump into the topic today, I am going to take a moment, so I hope that you'll indulge me to celebrate this milestone. In the past, I have not been the type of person to celebrate milestones, which manifested itself in my personal life, but also professionally, which had negative implications for my team. And so I, through my leadership career, really worked to develop the skill to celebrate. My skill is that's great. Let's keep pushing. We did this. Now there's something else to do. I'm always moving towards the next goal. And I recognize that not everyone is like me. And I also recognize that even I need to take time to slow down and recognize the work that has been done, that I have done. So, in my leadership career, as I was saying, I really worked hard to recognize and be aware of milestones and to take time to celebrate perhaps what others may not, but it is a skill I believe, depending on the type of person you are. But for me, it's definitely a skill. It's not something that comes natural to recognize moments of greatness, moments of excellence, no matter what it looks like during the day. I also believe it is one of the superpowers that I have been able to develop that has helped me be effective in my leadership and effective in building relationships with my team members and also my colleagues. That said, I still struggle with celebrating milestones for myself. So, episode 20, that's a nice round number. I'm going to take a moment and give myself a pat on the back for being here and being consistent with this podcast. I go back to episode 1, where I shared that I have had this goal in mind to share my thoughts on leadership, share my thoughts on what it means to be a woman of color in corporate, and to do that via a podcast for about 3 years. I have written out a number of potential posts. I have written notes about potential titles, who I would interview, which that list is definitely still alive and thriving. And so to be here in this moment, to have kept going, even at times where it was incredibly difficult, is a pat on the back moment. I think it was about episode 3 or maybe episode 4. I didn't go back to verify, but I had a significant life transition when I was laid off of my position. And the fact that I still kept going in that during that time, I didn't take a break at all. Um, that I celebrate, not because I pushed myself to do something that was unreasonable, but just the fact that I recognized in that time that this was more than just something I'm sitting down to do because it's popular, but that it's meaningful to me. And being able to sit down and have this space to talk and to share has been part of what has helped me through that life transition to be where I am now. And so I celebrate this moment for myself, but I also celebrate it with each and every one of you. I want to say a big thank you to those of you who DM me, who have emailed me, who have tuned in, who have left comments, even though sometimes I forget to check my comments while I'm talking. I thank you so much for your encouragement, for your support. I thank you for sharing this podcast and helping to spread the mission of building leaders who are focused on building influence and not getting caught in that pesky performance trap. So, thank you again. Celebrating. Whoop. with my cheer hands celebrating episode 20. I thank you for being here, and I thank you for continuing to be here and for being here as the podcast, I'm sure, as the weeks and the months and the years go on, will transform and will grow and develop. So you can say you are here when. All right. Jumping into today's topic, as you have likely seen, read somewhere, we're talking about authenticity. I always start off my podcast by saying I help leaders build influence. And one of the ways in which I help leaders develop influence and steer away from that pesky performance trap is by helping them to conquer and eliminate overwhelm. And with the women that I have spoken to over the years that I have been a coach, my clients, my colleagues, even myself, the consistent theme that I hear is not that the work itself, so the work product, whatever it is, whatever task you're doing, it's not that that is what is overwhelming. It is the complication of trying to determine how to show up at work, how to be who you are and be a leader. When you add onto that overwhelm the racial, ethnic, and ethnicity layer, it becomes even more complicated. And as I have seen this conversation about what is authentic, how do you show up as your authentic self at work, I hear the conversation focused, or what appears to be focused, on being a team member, being an employee. I don't hear as much guidance or as much conversation for how leaders themselves should navigate the how do I show up as authentic, as my authentic self? How do I come into work and be me to the fullest degree while also reconciling that there are additional responsibilities and burdens that come with leadership? And that's what I want to talk about today. I want to hopefully give guidance and share what has worked for me in the past. The reason that that's important is that if we as leaders are not finding a way to show up authentically, then we can't empower our team members to also show up as their best selves, as who they want to be, as who they are. We can't effectively create communities, cultures of inclusion and belonging if we ourselves have a very big wall set in front of us. What are the complications then that prevent us from, or that lead to us building up that wall? It is the fact that, and let's keep it real, like as a leader, you are a representative of the organization. You represent Acme Corporation, and your words, your actions, your lack of actions, your decisions, good, bad, indifferent, they hold weight. They hold more weight than what your team members do. Because if your decision, if your action or lack of action, that whole list that I just said, if someone, if another team, if a team member perceives it as not being being harmful, then you are held to a higher standard. You could be the reason that a lawsuit is launched, a complaint is launched, a grievance is filed. You could be the reason why an HR department has to come and do an investigation. And I have had team members, managers, who have not understood the line between being authentic, showing up as an excellent leader, and understanding that you can be yourself, but there is still an additional layer of responsibility that led to an investigation and led to them losing their position. So it's a very real conversation that I don't hear happening enough about how to guide leaders to show up authentically. And every time I see the advocacy for everyone showing up as their authentic self, I believe the LinkedIn hashtag was authentic is professional or the new professional, along those lines. And I fully support that. But sometimes I do cringe. I won't lie. I cringe when I hear it and I see it because the employee movement is moving, it's evolving at a faster rate overall than what's happening in corporate leadership culture. And without guidance, I do question the practicality of what that looks like from a leadership perspective. How do I show up as our authentic selves while still maintaining that level of additional responsibility and weight that comes with our positions? So let's start at the beginning. What does it mean to be authentic? When I think of myself, I am a female. I am a mom. I am a wife, a sister, a daughter, a friend, a cousin, and a leader. Of course, I'm other things as well, but the list could go on and on. I don't act the same in each of those situations or in each of those personas. And I think that we recognize that when I am a daughter or when I am a wife, I of course am showing up differently than when I'm a mother. And yes, these things all exist they all exist within us at the same time. But when I am focused on a situation where it's just my husband and I, that's different than when I'm hanging out and when I'm with my girls. And being different or acting different or showing up differently in those situations doesn't make me fake. And it doesn't make you fake either. Because I think that sometimes that this is what adds to that overwhelm I was talking about is how do I show up in a way where I won't be judged as perhaps being fake or I won't be judged as showing up as too much of myself and maybe not being perceived as professional. It's a lot, but I want to encourage you, part of releasing that overwhelm is that you are not fake. You can choose to show up however you feel comfortable showing up. And it doesn't matter that I show up to work and I lead differently than I am here in my home. I that would be silly. So let's take that judgment away about being fake. I don't expect and we shouldn't expect people to act the exact same way in every single situation, and that doesn't mean that you're not authentic. On the other hand, I don't feel that wearing that organizational uniform that and speaking organizational language means that the corporation itself is also not for authenticity. I don't believe that as a leader, the expectation that I am going to be a representative of the organization and I am going to act a certain way as they would expect their leaders to act, speak on behalf of the leadership in a certain way. I also don't believe that the requirement from the organization makes them an organization that isn't one that is for authenticity. But that's where the complication begins is how do I manage showing up the way I want to show up at work, as well as wearing that organizational uniform and speaking that language at the same time. That's where the overwhelm, from what I've heard from clients, what I've experienced myself, that's where the overwhelm develop is that's where the overwhelm develops. That's what I'm trying to say. And I hear the potential for overwhelm as I'm speaking about it as well. I hear it not just on the leader's part, but I can also see how it could be overwhelming for an employee to truly navigate and understand what that means. It's an ideal that may never be fully reached, but I certainly think it is worth the conversation. And I have enjoyed seeing the conversation evolve. These notes and this topic is one that I actually started writing about and thinking about last year. And in this year since I started writing those notes, it's been incredible to see the evolution of this topic. And so it's definitely one that's worthy to be had. The gap is, what do we do as leaders? How do we show up so that we are creating that space for our team members? But it begins with us. So for me, I consider authenticity as being where my character and my integrity can can where I can show up and still be able to show my character and integrity without any boundaries, without any restriction. The one when I think about all of the different personas who I am, a wife, a mother, a leader, when I think about all of those different personas, the one part that remains consistent, or the two parts that remain consistent, are my character and my integrity. And so for me, being authentic is being able to show up and respond to a situation, interact with people based on my character and based on my integrity. That's being authentic for me. That being able to, without again restriction, show who I am, and I'm empowered to be who I am at that level. That is authenticity for me. So that when I'm interacting with a team member, when I am interacting with a colleague or a customer or a client, whatever it is, that I'm showing up and I'm able to rely on all of my life's experiences that have led me to this place and that have made me who I am, that I'm able to pull from that, pull from my character and pull from my integrity. And let me tell you, when you start to focus on that foundation, when you are crystal clear on who you are and how you want to show up from an integrity perspective, it becomes very obvious when an organization isn't in line with who you are. And when those two things collide, then I highly recommend that you reconsider where you have landed and where you work. Because if there is a place where your character and your integrity has to be muted, where you can't express yourself or express a dissenting voice perhaps to the popular organizational culture, then that is a question that you have to ask yourself. Is this truly where I can be my authentic self, where I can show up in the fullness of my character and in the fullness of my integrity? And I understand character and integrity are fraught with a lot of judgment, with a lot of interpretation. But I think that we can all agree that there is a level of that we understand from an integrity perspective and a character perspective what it is that we're looking for to move our culture forward. And yes, that has come with its complications for me, where integrity perhaps means something different to me than it does that with a team member or with another colleague, for sure. But then that has opened up an opportunity for conversation, for learning, for discussion, for gaining understanding, and coming to a place where, okay, we are either I either understand where you're coming from and you understand where I'm coming from, or we have a real impasse and we need to bring in a third party like HR to help navigate the situation. But for the most part in my career, I have never had a serious disagreement on character and integrity where it was ambivalent or ambiguous or the situation was murky. I have had story time. I have had team members stealing from the organization. I have had team members who have taken actual money, taken food in my previous career as a food service director. And I think we can all agree that their stealing falls into that category of poor decision making. And of course, that led to the termination of a team member. I hate to say black and white, but there have been situations like that that have been black and white from that perspective, from an HR perspective. But I have never had a situation where there wasn't a conversation to gain understanding, where we couldn't leave with greater knowledge of where I was coming from, where the team member or my colleague was coming from. And so that's why I am so passionate about diving into authenticity from a leadership perspective. Because if you're struggling as a leader to understand what's appropriate for me, how do I show up but still be a representative and still maintain that professional relationship that doesn't lead to things like a lawsuit, and doesn't put the organization at a place of disadvantage. It has always been character and integrity that has guided me and that I have been able to rely on. Because while my employees, my team members may not know every single thing about me, while I certainly I don't go out with my team members. That's just for me personally from my personal leadership experience. I don't go out with team members, just one or two team members. We've gone out as a team event, but just not casually. I don't have just one or two team members come over to my home. I haven't done that. And that some people could say is standoffish. But what my team members have consistently relayed to me, and as I've shared this with my clients and colleagues have also shared their experiences with me, it helps to build trust. And as we're talking about building influence, trust is key. And when they know that I am consistent across my decisions, as consistent as a human can be, because I am rooted in my character and because I am rooted in my integrity, that builds trust. And it builds a way for them to know that they can be themselves because I will look at the situation from a certain perspective. And they know what that perspective is, and they trust that I will be consistent in that perspective. And when you are able to build an environment of trust, an environment of knowing, an environment of safety, then you are allowing your team members to show up as themselves. You're giving them space to show up as themselves because you've created that safe space for them. I You talked about, earlier on race and ethnicity. And as a Black woman, that has always been a challenge for me to understand what it means to show up as authentically as I can show up. Because, again, keeping it real, there's a lot of code switching that happens in the language and the way that we dress, show up, the way that we speak, the way that we share our opinions. And sometimes I can feel myself being held back or holding myself back because of past experience, whether real, perceived, otherwise. Um, I do feel that I can show up muted because of that code switching. But when I have leaned on my character, my integrity to help guide my actions, I have felt that release of that code switch. And again, I'm okay with putting on an organizational uniform as a leader and speaking that language as long as I know that I can show up the way that I need to support my team members, to support the organization in reaching their goals and creating those safe spaces. And that reliance on that foundation has been really helpful for me to let go of that expectation of how I'm supposed to show up as a Black woman leader. I am incredibly curious to know what are some of the ways that you are navigating, because this conversation is evolving and it will continue to evolve. But I would really like to hear from you as leaders. How are you navigating it yourself? For yourself, not just for your team members, how you're creating safe spaces for your team members. I really want to know how you are navigating authenticity within yourself while recognizing the complications and complexities that come with being a leader. Let me know, because it is it is just a conversation has that needs to continue to be discussed. It's that gap, as I was saying. It's the gap that has been there. And I think that we do a disservice when we only speak about these changes from a team member perspective and not from a leadership perspective as well. How are we guiding? How are we helping ourselves? Because again, if you're not showing up in an authentic way, whatever that looks like for you, then you cannot in return truly be effective at creating an environment, creating a culture, creating a community where your team members feel comfortable showing up as themselves. On a side note, as something fun, because leaders can be fun. I love color. I mean, if you can't tell, if you haven't been able to tell over the course of these 20 episodes, I love color and I love lipstick. So, in addition to my character and my integrity, some of the external ways that I show up as myself are bright lipstick colors, which some might say is unprofessional. I also frequently wore head wraps into work. I found ways to show up and show a little bit of my personality, but it never changed the way in which I interacted with my team members. But it was a way for them to feel like they knew a little bit more about me. So let me know, what are some ways that you show up as yourself in your workplace, and how are you navigating authenticity for yourself as a leader? Thank you for being here for episode 20. Please share this podcast. Use it again to create discussions, to spark discussions with your team. That when I hear those messages and receive those messages, that just makes me incredibly happy. I want to not only empower you, I want to empower the teams that you lead. So share as I work to build a community of influential leaders. I will see you next week. Bye.